Charles Bronson was not just known for his tough guy roles in movies, his personal life and on-set experiences also made him an unforgettable figure in Hollywood. While he often played roles where he was seen as the fearless, no-nonsense hero, there was a side to him that many people didn't know. Behind the scenes, his relationships with co-stars were sometimes rocky and some feuds were so intense that they left a mark on his career. However, there was one co-star who seemed to push Charles Bronson further than anyone else could, and this actor became the person that Bronson truly couldn't stand. Imagine a Hollywood legend, a man known for his grit and tough exterior, facing someone who challenged his limits not just professionally but personally. For years, Bronson was thought to be an unshakable figure in the film industry, respected by colleagues and fans alike. But the truth is, not everyone in Hollywood admired him, and not every actor respected him. In fact, there was one actor who had a reputation for being difficult on set, someone who even Bronson, with all his experience and strength, found impossible to tolerate. The curiosity surrounding this conflict has always lingered in the background. People have often wondered what could have possibly caused such tension between these two. What would make a man like Charles Bronson, who was used to dealing with physical challenges and the pressures of being a Hollywood action hero, so angry? And why did this co-star manage to get under his skin in ways that no one else ever could? There are many questions that fans and moviegoers have been asking for years, and the answers have remained hidden, only known to those who were behind the scenes. To understand this feud, it's important to look at Bronson's life and career up to that point. Bronson was already an established star when this particular co-star entered the scene. He had worked with many famous actors and directors, and over the years he had built a reputation for being serious, hard-working and focused on his roles. Despite the toughness he portrayed in his movies, Bronson was known to be a man of discipline, someone who didn't get involved in petty Hollywood drama. He was the kind of actor who believed in professionalism and taking his work seriously, which made him all the more fascinating to fans. However, when this co-star came into the picture, everything changed. The actor in question was someone with a completely different approach to acting in the film industry. His style was unpredictable, and he often clashed with directors, crew members, and fellow actors. Despite being talented, this co-star had a reputation for being difficult to work with, and it didn't take long for Bronson to feel the heat of their personalities colliding. The tension on set grew as this co-star seemed to challenge Bronson's authority, and their interactions became uncomfortable for everyone involved. It wasn't just about their differences in acting styles, it was deeper than that. The clash between them was rooted in something more personal, something that even Bronson couldn't overlook. For someone who had spent years fighting on screen, whether in war films or action-packed thrillers, this was a different kind of battle, one that was fought not with fists but with words and attitudes. Bronson, known for keeping his personal life private and his work life professional, suddenly found himself in a position where his personal feelings towards this co-star were hard to ignore. For Bronson, the tension became unbearable. What started as small disagreements soon escalated into full-blown arguments, leaving other cast and crew members uneasy. People on set began to notice the growing divide, and whispers started to spread about the animosity between Bronson and this actor. It was unlike anything anyone had seen before from Bronson, who was usually quiet and focused on his roles. The frustration built up over time, and the heat of their relationship became a talking point among those working on the film. The real question, however, remains: what caused this deep dislike between the two? What made Bronson, who had worked with so many other actors without issue, single out this one person? The answer is not just about their personalities clashing. It goes deeper into the way they viewed the film industry, their approach to their roles, and even their beliefs about how a set should run. Bronson, who had a very straightforward approach to his craft, found himself at odds with someone who didn't share the same discipline and professionalism. It's said that this co-star had a more laid-back, sometimes even reckless approach to their work, and that rubbed Bronson the wrong way. The impact of this conflict was not just seen on set, it lingered long after the film wrapped. Bronson, despite his tough exterior, was deeply affected by this feud. It was rare for him to let personal feelings interfere with his work, but this situation was different. This was a co-star who had managed to break through the walls that Bronson had carefully built around his professional life. The impact of this on his career and his image in Hollywood was significant. While many fans never learned the full story behind their feud, those who were close to the production could feel the lasting effects of their clash. This behind-the-scenes drama might have stayed hidden from the public for many years, but the tension between Charles Bronson and this co-star was real, and it shaped both of their careers in unexpected ways. The questions about why it happened and who exactly was involved are still unanswered for many, adding to the intrigue and mystery surrounding this Hollywood legend. Charles Bronson was a man of many talents, but beyond his on-screen persona, he was known for having a strong character that others either admired or clashed with. To understand why this particular co-star pushed Bronson's limits, you have to think about what made Bronson so different from most other actors. He wasn't just playing tough characters for the audience. He was a tough person in real life too, shaped by years of hard work and experiences that few others could truly relate to. He grew up in poverty, and from an early age he learned the value of hard work and perseverance. Bronson never let anything stand in his way. He worked his way up through the film industry, earning respect not just from directors and producers but also from his fellow actors. He wasn't the type to get involved in Hollywood gossip or drama. He did his job, took his roles seriously, and focused on creating a legacy of action-packed films. But despite his toughness, there was a side of him that couldn't stand disrespect. And this is where the tension with this co-star began to take root. The co-star in question was someone who had a completely different approach to their craft. Unlike Bronson, this actor wasn't as serious about the work. While Bronson would spend hours preparing for a role, focusing on how to bring the character to life in the most authentic way possible, this co-star was more laid back, often relying on their natural charm and ability to improvise rather than putting in the same level of dedication. This difference in attitude was apparent to everyone on set. It wasn't just a small issue, it was something that clashed with Bronson's values. He couldn't understand how someone who was in the same business, working with the same resources, could treat their job with such disregard. As the filming days went by, it became clear that this co-star's behavior was beginning to affect the rest of the cast and crew as well. While Bronson maintained his professionalism, the other actors' actions were beginning to cause delays, frustration, and even tension between other members of the team. It's not easy to work on a film set where deadlines are tight and there's a lot of pressure to get everything done perfectly. But what made the situation even harder was the fact that this actor didn't seem to take those pressures seriously. They would show up late, improvise lines without consulting the script, and sometimes create drama where there was none. Bronson, who was used to precision and dedication, found this behavior completely unacceptable. This wasn't the first time Bronson had worked with someone who had a different approach to acting, but this was the first time someone's attitude affected him so deeply. And it wasn't just the professional side of things that bothered Bronson, it was the personal side too. There were moments when this actor would make jokes or comments that seemed to get under Bronson's skin, mocking his seriousness or making light of the hard work that Bronson put into his roles. Bronson, who was a man of few words, wasn't the type to lash out or engage in petty arguments. But there were moments on set where his frustration was impossible to hide. People who were working on the film could sense the growing tension between the two, and they knew that it wasn't just about acting styles. There was something more personal at play. As much as Bronson tried to stay calm and keep his focus on the work, it became clear that this co-star's actions were affecting him in ways no one could ignore. The calm, composed Bronson was now showing signs of irritation, something that hadn't been seen before. This was a man who had dealt with countless challenges in his life, both in and out of Hollywood, but this situation was different. In the world of film where egos can sometimes run wild, actors often have to find a way to balance their differences. But in Bronson's case, he wasn't willing to let the lines blur. He didn't want to work with someone who didn't take their craft seriously. He believed that acting was an art, and it deserved respect. And when that respect was lacking, it made him question whether the collaboration was even worth continuing. For Bronson, it wasn't just about the paycheck or the fame, it was about being a part of something meaningful. And he couldn't ignore the fact that his co-star wasn't on the same page. So what exactly made this co-star push Bronson to his limits? It wasn't a single incident, it was a series of small actions, small slights, and an overall attitude that wore on Bronson's nerves. It was the lack of respect for the work, the constant disregard for the process, and the unwillingness to put in the same effort as everyone else on the set. And most importantly, it was the fact that Bronson, a man who had always fought for what he believed in, couldn't understand how someone could be so careless with something he loved so deeply. As the film continued, the tension only grew. People on set began to notice that things weren't the same. Bronson's usual quiet demeanor was now accompanied by sharp comments and a cold distance from his co-star. The other actor, sensing the shift, began to respond with their own passive-aggressive behavior, further fueling the fire. It became a battle of wills, and no one knew how it was going to end. Would Bronson continue to tolerate this behavior, or would he finally break his silence and confront the co-star about their differences? The questions remained, but one thing was clear: Bronson's patience was running thin, and this co-star had somehow managed to push him further than anyone else had before. The question wasn't just about who was right or wrong, it was about what this conflict meant for both their careers and how it would impact their future collaborations in Hollywood. There are certain things about Hollywood that people rarely get to see: the hidden feuds, the unspoken tensions, and the personal battles that take place behind the glamour of the red carpet. One of the most shocking stories to come out of the industry was the intense drama between Charles Bronson and his co-star. While the public saw Bronson as the strong, silent hero behind the scenes, his world was far more complicated. The conflict between these two actors was more than just a clash of personalities. It was a deeper, more personal drama that few people could ever have predicted. What made this drama so different from other Hollywood feuds was the sheer scale of the tension. Bronson wasn't known for being easy to rattle. He had seen it all. He had worked with directors who pushed him to his limits and co-stars who had their own egos. Yet despite all the challenges he had faced in his career, it was this one co-star who seemed to get under his skin more than anyone else. What was it about this actor that could shake Bronson's typically unshakable demeanor? The relationship between Bronson and this co-star had started off professionally. When they were first introduced, no one thought much of it. After all, Hollywood was full of new faces and fresh talent, and Bronson had worked with many actors in the past. But as the days went on, something started to shift. At first it was small things. A comment here, a disagreement there. Nothing too dramatic, but enough to raise a few eyebrows. Soon those small disagreements grew into larger problems. The actor's behavior began to cause friction, not just between Bronson and himself, but among the entire crew. It became clear that the professional environment was starting to suffer, and the production was at risk of falling behind schedule. Bronson, known for his dedication and work ethic, couldn't ignore the growing tension. He had built his career on being reliable, on giving everything to his roles. He took his craft seriously, and that's what made his feud with this co-star so significant. This wasn't just about two actors not getting along. It was about two very different worldviews colliding. Bronson believed in the power of professionalism and hard work. He saw acting as a job that required discipline, effort, and respect for everyone involved. But this co-star had a different approach, one that didn't fit into Bronson's idea of what it meant to be an actor. The conflict became more evident as the production went on. It wasn't just about the occasional disagreement anymore. The co-star's attitude was beginning to disrupt the entire production. There were moments when lines were forgotten, scenes were delayed, and other actors had to pick up the slack. What was once a collaborative effort now felt like a strained environment, and it all seemed to come back to this one actor. Bronson, who was used to taking control and ensuring that everything ran smoothly, found himself at the mercy of someone who wasn't taking the job seriously. The tension between the two was palpable, and it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. As the days passed, the situation only got worse. Bronson, a man who had been through countless tough situations in his life, found himself unable to stay calm. His patience, which had always been one of his greatest virtues, was beginning to wear thin. The co-star's behavior seemed to get more and more erratic, and the cracks in their relationship began to show. It wasn't just about professional disagreements anymore. It was personal. The co-star's attitude towards Bronson, combined with their lack of respect for the work, created a situation that was difficult to repair. It wasn't just a matter of two actors not getting along. It had become a battle of values, of what it meant to be a true professional in the world of acting. Despite all of this, Bronson remained quiet for the most part. He wasn't the type of person to air his grievances publicly. He wasn't one for drama or confrontation, but the tension was beginning to show in other ways. People who worked on the set could feel the heat between the two actors. The cold exchanges, the awkward silences, and the obvious discomfort during scenes. It was clear to everyone that something was wrong. But the public, the fans, had no idea. They saw the tough guy Bronson in the films, the man who could take on any challenge and come out victorious. They didn't know about the inner struggle that was taking place behind the scenes. The interesting thing about this feud is that it wasn't just about Bronson disliking this co-star's behavior. It was about how their different approaches to acting reflected larger tensions within the industry. Bronson represented the old school of acting: discipline, hard work, and dedication. This co-star, on the other hand, was more representative of a newer, more laid-back approach to filmmaking, one that didn't always value the hard work that went into creating a great performance. In many ways, this was a conflict between two different generations of actors, each with their own ideas about what it meant to be a part of the film industry. So why did it take so long for Bronson to speak out about the situation? Why did he let it fester for so long? The answer lies in Bronson's personality. He was a man of few words, someone who didn't like to make waves. He had been through enough in his life that he didn't feel the need to argue or fight over petty things. But this situation was different. This wasn't just about a disagreement over a scene or a line. This was about respect, professionalism, and the way Bronson viewed his work. And eventually it became clear that he couldn't ignore it any longer. As the filming continued, the tension grew more intense. It became a constant undercurrent, something that everyone could feel but no one could escape. The real question became whether this conflict would continue to affect Bronson's career or if it would eventually fade into the background, as many Hollywood feuds tend to do. Would Bronson's ability to work with this co-star improve, or would the tensions only grow? The mystery of this behind-the-scenes drama would continue to unfold, with each day on set revealing more about the true nature of their relationship. In the world of Hollywood, where fame and fortune often come with immense pressure, actors are expected to be able to work with a wide range of personalities. Charles Bronson was no exception. As one of Hollywood's most respected and established action stars, he had worked with many actors over the years. Most of these collaborations were smooth, with mutual respect and professionalism on both sides. But the situation with this particular co-star was different. It wasn't just about a disagreement on set, it was about the way this co-star's actions and attitudes started to affect Bronson's life in ways he never expected. Charles Bronson, despite his tough guy image, was a man who valued respect above all else. He didn't expect everyone to agree with him, but he did expect people to treat him and his work with respect. In many ways, his dedication to his craft was what made him such a respected figure in Hollywood. But this co-star, with their carefree attitude and lack of seriousness, seemed to undermine everything that Bronson stood for. The tension between them grew as it became clear that their working styles were fundamentally different. This wasn't just a clash of egos, it was a clash of values. At first, Bronson tried to remain patient. He was used to dealing with difficult people. In his earlier years, he had worked on tough sets and with challenging co-stars. He had learned how to navigate these situations without letting them affect his work. However, this situation was different. This wasn't just about a few small annoyances. It was about something deeper, something that challenged Bronson's sense of professionalism. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The turning point came when the tensions on set became too much to handle. The co-star's behavior wasn't just affecting the work, it was starting to affect Bronson's mental and emotional state. He was known for being quiet, serious, and focused on his craft. But now he found himself feeling frustrated, angry, and even disillusioned by the whole process. The work, which had always been his escape, had become a battleground. Bronson was known for his ability to remain calm in even the most intense situations. But this co-star's lack of professionalism pushed him to his breaking point. People on set began to notice the change in Bronson. He was no longer the calm, composed actor they had come to know. The cold tension between the two actors was palpable. Other members of the crew started to feel the strain as well. It was clear that the conflict between Bronson and this co-star was starting to affect the entire production. The focus on the job was slipping away, and the atmosphere on set became increasingly uncomfortable. Despite the mounting tension, Bronson never lost his sense of professionalism. He didn't lash out or create drama on set, but those who were paying close attention could see the toll it was taking on him. He was a man who had always kept his personal feelings separate from his work, but this was a different kind of situation. The more he tried to ignore the conflict, the harder it became to stay focused on the task at hand. The frustration grew, and Bronson began to distance himself from the co-star. He no longer made small talk or engaged in conversations that felt forced. Instead, he kept his head down, focusing solely on the work at hand. But what was it that made this particular actor stand out so much? What was it about their behavior that so deeply upset Bronson? It wasn't just the unprofessionalism or the lack of respect for the process. It was the way this actor seemed to challenge everything Bronson believed about acting. Bronson had always seen his roles as more than just a job. He saw them as a way to connect with audiences, to tell stories that mattered. This co-star, on the other hand, seemed to treat acting as just another opportunity for fame and attention. Bronson couldn't understand how someone could approach their craft with such a lack of seriousness. As the days went by, Bronson's frustration grew. He found himself questioning the entire film industry and the way things were changing. He had come from a time when acting was seen as a serious profession, something that required dedication and hard work. But now he was confronted with an industry that seemed to prioritize popularity over skill, fame over substance. The conflict with this co-star was symbolic of a larger shift in Hollywood, one that Bronson wasn't entirely comfortable with. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his values and the values of the younger generation of actors were in direct conflict. The growing tension began to spill over into the public eye. Although the fans and the public weren't aware of the full details, it was hard to ignore the fact that something was off. Bronson was known for his strong, silent demeanor, and now people began to see cracks in that image. The questions started to pop up: what was going on behind the scenes? Why did Bronson seem so different all of a sudden? For the first time in his career, Bronson's personal life was beginning to affect his professional image, and that was something he had always worked hard to protect. As the production neared its end, it became clear that the relationship between Bronson and this co-star wasn't going to improve. Despite the best efforts of the crew and the director, the tension was too high. The final days of shooting were marked by a cold silence between the two actors. Bronson, who had always taken pride in his ability to work with anyone, now found himself unable to look past the differences that separated him from this co-star. Looking back on this time, it's easy to see how the conflict between Bronson and this actor marked a turning point in his career. For years, Bronson had been known as a professional, a man who could handle any situation with grace and strength. But this feud with his co-star revealed a side of him that the public had never seen before. It was a side of Bronson that was vulnerable, one that was deeply affected by the way the industry was changing. The tension with this co-star forced Bronson to confront the reality that not everyone in Hollywood shared his values, and that sometimes, even the strongest actors could be brought to their breaking point. At the heart of any good story, there's always a moment when everything changes, a turning point that pushes the characters to their limits. For Charles Bronson, that moment came when he reached the point where he could no longer keep his frustrations hidden. For years, Bronson had built a reputation as a man who could keep his emotions in check, someone who wasn't quick to anger or get involved in petty conflicts. He had faced countless challenges throughout his career, but this particular situation felt different. The growing tension with his co-star wasn't just affecting his work, it was beginning to affect his personal life as well. The pressure was mounting on Bronson. It wasn't just the constant disruption on set that was bothering him. It was the fact that the co-star's behavior seemed to challenge everything Bronson had ever worked for. The lack of respect for the craft of acting, the unwillingness to put in the same effort, and the casual approach to their work were all things that Bronson couldn't understand. He had always believed that acting was an art form, something that required dedication, hard work, and respect. But this actor's approach felt like a slap in the face to everything Bronson held dear. The situation on set was becoming more unbearable with each passing day. The co-star's behavior was no longer just a minor inconvenience. It had become a serious issue, one that was beginning to affect the entire production. The crew was growing frustrated, and the cast members who had once worked together as a cohesive unit were now finding it harder and harder to work in such a tense atmosphere. The delay in scenes, the forgotten lines, and the lack of preparation were all taking a toll on the morale of the team. Bronson, who was known for his professionalism, was now forced to watch as his colleagues struggled to keep things on track. Despite all of this, Bronson remained silent. He was a man who didn't believe in drama or confrontation. He had always prided himself on being able to keep his head down and get the job done, no matter the circumstances. But the more he watched his co-star's behavior, the more frustrated he became. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about the respect that was being undermined. Bronson had worked too hard to get where he was to let someone come in and act as if the job didn't matter. The turning point came one day when Bronson could no longer hold his tongue. The actor's behavior had reached a breaking point, and Bronson was finally pushed to confront the situation. It wasn't an easy decision for him, as he wasn't the type to publicly call someone out, but the pressure had been building for so long that he knew something had to change. He couldn't just continue to stand by and let the situation deteriorate any further. When the confrontation finally happened, it wasn't as dramatic as many might have expected. There were no shouting matches or public outbursts. Instead, it was a quiet, tense exchange where Bronson finally expressed his frustration with the co-star's behavior. The co-star, who had likely been aware of the growing tension, was taken aback by Bronson's directness. It was clear that this wasn't the way Bronson usually handled things. He had always been someone who avoided conflict, so to see him finally speak up was a rare and significant moment. What followed was a period of reflection for both of them. Bronson, who had always prided himself on his professionalism, was forced to acknowledge that even he had limits. He realized that sometimes, no matter how hard you try to keep things professional, certain situations can push you beyond what you can tolerate. For the co-star, it was a wake-up call. They had likely never faced someone like Bronson before. A person who wasn't willing to compromise on his values, no matter the circumstances. Despite this confrontation, the tension didn't immediately disappear. In fact, it only grew as the days went on. The co-star, although they had heard Bronson's words, didn't seem to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. They continued to show up late, forget lines, and act in ways that made the entire production feel like a chaotic mess. Bronson, who had hoped that this confrontation would bring about some change, found himself even more frustrated than before. He had done his part to try to resolve the situation, but it seemed as if his efforts were in vain. The rest of the cast and crew continued to watch the situation unfold, unsure of how things would play out. Everyone on set could feel the strain in the air. The tension was palpable, and it was clear that something had to give. But the question remained, would the conflict eventually lead to a resolution, or would it destroy the entire project? For Bronson, the future of this collaboration seemed uncertain. He had always been someone who valued hard work, respect, and professionalism, but in this case, those values seemed to be at odds with the way things were unfolding. The more Bronson reflected on the situation, the more he began to realize that this was more than just a conflict with one actor. It was a symbol of the larger changes happening in Hollywood. The industry was shifting, and the way actors approached their craft was changing. What Bronson saw as a lack of respect for the art of acting was to some extent a reflection of the way the film industry itself was evolving. He couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end for the kind of Hollywood he had known, a Hollywood where hard work and dedication were valued above everything else. As the film neared its completion, the tensions between Bronson and his co-star remained. The production went on, but it was clear that this experience had left a lasting impact on Bronson. He had always been a private man, someone who kept his emotions in check. But this situation had forced him to confront a side of himself he didn't often show. It had shown him that even the most stoic of actors could be affected by the behaviors of those around them. The film would eventually be finished, but the lessons learned from this difficult experience would stay with Bronson for the rest of his career. The world of Hollywood is often seen through a glamorous lens, but those who work in it know that the reality is far more complicated. Behind the scenes, there are constant struggles, disagreements, and tensions that rarely make it to the public eye. For Charles Bronson, the conflict with his co-star became a defining moment in his career, one that would change the way he saw not just his profession but the industry as a whole. The experience forced him to question everything he had believed about his work, the people he worked with, and the world of Hollywood itself. By this point, Bronson had already gone through years of challenging and intense experiences in his career. He had worked with some of the biggest names in the business and had encountered numerous difficult situations, but this particular conflict felt different. It wasn't just about dealing with an unprofessional co-star, it was about something much deeper. The tension had started to affect Bronson in ways he hadn't anticipated. For someone who had spent his life focused solely on his work, the emotional toll of the conflict was becoming harder to ignore. He was known for his ability to remain calm under pressure, but the constant frustration had begun to chip away at his usual calm demeanor. What made this situation even more complicated was the fact that Bronson wasn't someone who liked to complain or make a scene. He was a man of few words and preferred to let his work speak for itself. Yet as the days went on, it became clear that the growing tension was affecting more than just the production. It was affecting Bronson's personal well-being. He had always kept his emotions separate from his work, but this co-star's behavior was proving to be too much. It was no longer just a professional problem, it was a personal one as well. The public had always seen Bronson as a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy. He was the kind of actor who could walk into any situation and take charge. His strong and silent persona made him one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. But behind that persona was a man who had feelings, a man who cared deeply about his work and the people he worked with. It was this deep commitment to his craft that made the situation with his co-star so difficult to bear. Bronson had always believed in the value of hard work, respect, and professionalism. These were the principles that guided him throughout his career. But this actor seemed to disregard all of that, and it left Bronson feeling betrayed. As the tension between the two actors continued to build, the rest of the cast and crew began to notice the strain. It wasn't just a minor issue anymore, it was a full-blown problem that was affecting the entire production. The crew had always respected Bronson for his professionalism, but now they could see that even he was struggling to cope with the situation. The other actors were finding it difficult to concentrate on their scenes with the constant friction in the air. The atmosphere on set had changed. What had once been a productive and focused environment was now filled with tension and frustration. Despite all of this, Bronson kept his frustrations mostly to himself. He wasn't the type of person to create drama or stir up trouble. He was always the one who focused on the work, not the gossip. But there was only so much a person could take. The growing tension between the two actors was starting to affect the entire production, and Bronson couldn't just stand by and let it continue. The situation had become so bad that it was impossible to ignore any longer. It wasn't just about making a movie anymore, it was about maintaining the respect and professionalism that Bronson had worked so hard to build. As the conflict reached its peak, the crew and other actors began to realize that the production was in serious jeopardy. The constant delays, the forgotten lines, the lack of focus, all of it pointed to one thing. The tension between Bronson and his co-star had reached a breaking point. The question on everyone's mind was whether the film could even be completed under these circumstances. The drama unfolding behind the scenes was so intense that it seemed as though it might overshadow the actual film itself. Bronson had always prided himself on finishing what he started, but this time, it felt like the odds were stacked against him. But despite the mounting pressure, Bronson refused to back down. He wasn't the type of person to run away from a challenge. He had been through too much in his life to give up on something that mattered to him. But the question remained, how long could he keep fighting this battle? How much longer could he endure the tension and frustration that was taking such a toll on him? At the same time, the conflict between the two actors was beginning to take on a life of its own. It wasn't just about Bronson anymore. The co-star's behavior had become a topic of conversation among the cast and crew. The growing rumors and whispers were starting to spread throughout the production. People were beginning to take sides. Some were sympathetic to Bronson, understanding that he was simply trying to maintain professionalism in a difficult situation. Others, however, were starting to question whether Bronson's reaction was a bit over the top. After all, the co-star was still a talented actor, and some felt that they should be given more leeway. This division was only adding to the tension, and it made the entire situation even more complicated. Meanwhile, Bronson was left to reflect on what had brought him to this point. The constant frustration with his co-star had forced him to confront the reality of the changing nature of Hollywood. The industry was evolving, and the way actors approached their work was shifting. What had once been a place where talent, discipline, and respect were highly valued was now becoming more focused on image and fame. This shift in values was something that Bronson found difficult to accept. He had spent years building a reputation based on hard work and dedication, and now he was forced to watch as the industry seemed to prioritize other qualities. The conflict with this co-star was not just a personal issue, it was a symbol of a larger change in the world of Hollywood. As the days passed, Bronson couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could stay in an industry that seemed to be drifting further away from his values. His commitment to his craft had always been his guiding force, but now, that force was being tested in ways he hadn't expected. Was this the beginning of the end for the Hollywood he had known? Would he be able to adapt to the changes, or would he be left behind as the industry moved forward without him? Despite all the tension and uncertainty, one thing was clear: Bronson had reached a crossroads in his career. The way he dealt with this conflict, and the lessons he learned from it, would shape his future in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. The drama on set may have been a painful experience, but it was also an opportunity for growth. It forced Bronson to confront his own beliefs about the industry and the kind of actor he wanted to be. In the end, this conflict wasn't just about the co-star, it was about Bronson finding his place in a changing world.